let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in
What is that process that a developer, or let's say,
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed? Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the Level Up Hour. So first of all, apologies for the few hiccups we had for starting the show. So today we have a special guest with us. We have Daniel Messer, product manager for our Red Hat registry called named Quay. And that's it's a good thing because today we are actually going to speak about setting up custom registries with OpenShift. And Daniel will have the pleasure to explain how we can use Quay as one of these options with the platform. So yeah, again, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for everyone who's joining the show. Daniel, would you like to say a few words about you, what you do before we get started?
Sure. Thanks, Jafar, and thanks for having me, by the way. I'm a product manager at Red Hat. I look after our central multi-cluster registry component called Red Hat Quay that we have as a strategic element of our portfolio strategy around OpenShift whenever you want to run more than one cluster. So we think that's a pretty important topic in the future, and that's actually going to be the model that many people will prefer in the future. Now that it is, very straightforward to run and configure OpenShift 4 in the self-managed fashion it allows you to do with all the operational concepts around it. So I also look after the hosted offering of Quay, that is Quay.io, which is also interesting because it's the same code that runs this pretty massive public registry service you can just sign up for with your credit card. So just to give you a couple of numbers for that. So Quay.io serves over 2 billion images per month. And it has petabytes of images under management and governance, which means organizing your storage, your tags, your access policies, scanning the content of these images, building these images even from triggers that are coming from GitLab or GitHub. So it's a pretty interesting combination, sort of a hybrid between a SaaS offering and a on-prem product. Outside of that, I also do product management for OpenShift components. So you may have seen me speaking about things like the operator framework, the operator lifecycle manager. This is also one of my responsibilities.
Very nice. Thank you, Daniel. So you are one of the guys responsible for making operators easier to consume in general on the platform and to manage their lifecycle. So yeah, thanks for that, because it helps a lot with the operators adoption in general. Absolutely. All right, so so maybe we should get started before diving into the specific topics. I wanted to have a few words about OpenShift and the integrated registry. So for those who have been familiar with OpenShift, we've shipped an integrated registry since the early days, and even before the acquisition of Quay, actually. And so that's one of the benefits of the platform, is that as the name platform implies, it has all the components already set up and ready to use for you. So we do have the integrated registry that runs by default with the platform. It manages the images that get built on the platform, but you can also build images outside and push them to the registry if it's exposed. So it does work actually pretty well if you are using it with the cluster in the context of its own cluster. But Daniel, could you please tell us why should we think of using anything other than that? I mean, it does work out of the box, but are there any reasons to look for something else?
Yeah, I like that you acknowledge how easy it is to work with that just out of the box, right? Because there's really not much configuration or management overhead to it. The only thing you really need to do at the very beginning when you set up the cluster is to essentially tell that integrated registry where your storage is. And it can use internal storage of the cluster as well, like persistent volumes, but you will want to prefer object storage like Red Hat OpenShift Data Foundations, ODF, if possible. So yeah, it's pretty convenient, right? Because it is sort of working in the background all the time. So whenever you import images into OpenShift, or you use OpenShift's build functionality to create images as part of a container build process or source to image, it kind of gets used in the background, right? So the integrated registry doesn't really have a UI in the sense. You just use it indirectly via OpenShift features like image streams and build configs and image stream tags. So these are abstractions that come with the integrated registry. And they're all the stuff that you would normally need to do in order to connect really any Kubernetes cluster to an external registry or any registry, which is setting up users, creating credentials, defining what these users can see and don't see, and then distribute those credentials to the cluster. All that happens automatically with the integrated registry. You never have to worry about pull secrets or permissions or repositories, namespaces that need to get created upfront. All this happens, in sync when you create projects in OpenShift and image streams in OpenShift, and you start to use those, right? So the one caveat, though, is that the whole concept of this integrated registry is, or the whole context is really just that one cluster, right? So it lives inside that cluster. You can technically export it, so others can, push to it or pull content from, but it is not meant to be used outside of the cluster in the sense that you have a multi-tenancy scenario, because the tenancy of this integrated registry is really tied to that cluster. So in order to make other clusters use that, you would need to be able to do things like permission management, creating RBAC definitions, creating users, user groups. Please put them into a sort of a bucket that's called a namespace in registry, or an organization as we call it. So these are things that aren't possible with the internal registry because it's not supposed to be used outside of the OpenShift APIs. So the moment you want to have something central, you need to do a little bit more setup, right? And we think having a central registry is sort of a common architectural pattern that we'll see way more in the future. So I'm going to share a slide here real quick just to show that. So we see Red Hat Quay as such an integrated external central registry to OpenShift multi-cluster deployments. And this has various benefits, right? So one of the benefits is that you manage all your content, all the definitions of who your users are, which teams they belong to, which access rights they have to the various content in the registry. You manage all of that in a single place, right? So you can see all the content in a single place as well. You can see what exists, what versions of images are available. And you can also see inside those images with Quay. So Quay does not only store and serve your images according to permissions that you set up, it also scans the images and indexes the content inside. So it can recognize RPMs, Debian package files, Alpine package files, but even Python pip packages, or most recently added as tech preview, Java archives. And it will index this information. And one reason it does that is in order to tell you when those components have known security vulnerabilities. So Quay also scans your images for CVEs to give you an analysis of the security posture that you have from the content perspective before anything even hits the cluster, right? So that's a pretty central aspect. The moment you have multiple clusters across multiple providers and even maybe from multiple vendors, you definitely want to have something as central as that. But when you do that, you also kind of put all your eggs in one basket, right? Which is, operationally sort of something you need to plan for and account for. Such a registry cannot be down, like even for 5 minutes. So like if the internal registry is down in an OpenShift cluster, well, that will only impact workloads that come from that internal registry. So, image streams that you've imported or things that you've built inside a cluster. But if you connect an entire OpenShift cluster, multiple of those, to a central registry, that means also the images that the cluster itself uses come from that registry, right? And you want that because you want to centrally manage which OpenShift versions are available to install, which OpenShift versions you can update to, which applications and operators are available. So all this needs to have basically the uptime of the Red Hat registry that you would normally use to do these things, right? So, and Quay's architecture is very well primed for this kind of HA scenario. I said earlier that we run Quay IO the service on the same code base. We run it really in the same architecture as well as a product in the cluster as well. So you can run Quay in an OpenShift cluster as a workload managed by an operator, but also on RHEL nodes outside of the cluster. But fundamentally, it's the same scale-out architecture, the same HA architecture that can scale like from a couple of handful of clusters to hundreds of clusters from a performance perspective, right? So, and that is something you really need if you are going to have a central registry. So when you have that, you also start to have questions about, well, what happens if, let's say, one of these clusters here is very far away? It will pull all this precious content over a potentially very small pipeline of just a couple of 100 kilobytes, right? If it's coming across a larger geographical distance. So that will prolong all your rollouts and any event really that creates a pull request against the registry. So Quay has the ability to actually span geographical deployments as well. It has a geo-replication feature, which is pretty unique in industry, which makes it appear from the outside as one big federated registry with just a single URL and a single set of credentials, a single entry point to pull content from. But in reality, it's actually distributed potentially across the globe, but syncs content asynchronously in the background. So these kind of things become extremely important if you want to reap the benefits of a central registry solution. And we think that Quay and its architecture that it ships with is extremely well built for that, which is the reason why we put it in the OpenShift Platform Plus package. As an OpenShift Platform Plus customer, you get this basically out of the box for free. And you have a really, really robust registry at hand, which you really need, because the moment your registry is down, you will notice within your clusters basically within 5 minutes. So there are so many events in the cluster that need to talk to a registry that it ranges from you can't reconfigure your software, you can't scale out your deployments, you can't change your cluster configuration, you cannot expand your cluster by additional nodes. Nodes cannot even reboot if the registry the cluster is served from is momentarily down. So it's pretty impactful, right? So uptime is really important, and Quay delivers that very confidently across multiple clusters, and that's why we can have such a central approach to all of this.
Okay. So yeah, thanks a lot, Daniel. So just to summarize, one of the key core features I hear here is that it allows you to have a central repository that, because it's becoming such an crucial part of your architecture and of your clusters, it needs to be HA. And also, if you have clusters spread out around the planet, maybe you are in different geographies and you have some in APAC, some in the US, some in Europe, for instance. Having all the clusters talk to a single located registry doesn't really play in terms of having great performances. So what I'm hearing here is that you can have geo-replicated instances that have all the content that is mirrored across all those local registries, but it's managed centrally still. You don't have to manually do all of those synchronizations and such things.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, that's that's a pretty good reason actually to switch to using such a kind of registry. So before we go into a demonstration, actually, we have a question. So Someone says, I tried to install the Quay operator on my home lab, and the resource requirements were a bit too high for small nodes. Is there a push to minimize Quay for use in Edge, for instance? So yeah, I mean, you can answer, or I can give also an answer, whatever you want. But since you're the
Sure.
PM,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, it's certainly true that Quay has a little bit of a higher entry bar than the usual registry deployment. You may know from, tutorials that you see upstream where you deploy a very small Docker registry that comes without basically any features other than push and pull. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So we would definitely want to like reduce the initial resource consumption of Quay. So right now, what the operator does really is aim to give you a production-grade Quay deployment that really can fulfill this use case I showed before, where it's the central registry, right? So it makes a couple of assumptions for you about that. For instance, that you want to have two replicas of all scalable components, right? To have rolling restarts during updates and HA in case a node goes down. So
Yeah.
there's also the topic of resource reservations. So the operator asks the cluster for a certain level of resources that have to be provided by the nodes and have to be allocated to the Quay components specifically before it can even start, right? And this is how we make sure that the registry isn't starving for resources when the cluster is kind of under load, because again, with a central registry, you kind of have this, domino effect in the rest of your multi-cluster landscape if it has problems or performance issues or even availability issues. So we're trying to fine tune that to kind of lower these as well. One easy win you can definitely try right now is disable the horizontal pod auto
HPA.
scaling that the operator does. So that would get you down to a single replica of all the components, but there are still the resource reservations that the operator makes. We are looking to lower those as well in order to have a little bit more coverage in smaller environments. But in general, you will not really get below a requirement of at least 2 vCPUs and 6 cores for Quay. If you enable Claire security image scanning, that will be another 2 cores and at least 4 gigs of memory. Quay and Claire, the scanning engine, both need databases. So these need to be Postgres databases. They usually come with at least 2 to 4 gig of memory as well, and at least one vCPU. For the Claire database, we want to have at least 2 vCPUs because scanning and indexing all this content is also pretty database intensive, at least initially when you index a lot of content. So if you like disable some of these features, you will save on some resources. And if you just want to use mirroring, then you can certainly disable a couple of things like that. But I would say the operator-based deployment is potentially always going to be a little bit more difficult in an edge scenario. For edge deployments, we have actually released the packaged version of Quay where just a minimal instance of Quay gets deployed. We call this the mirror registry for OpenShift. And the use case here is to really provide a bootstrap registry for an edge cluster that has no direct connectivity to a central data center. So it relies on this registry to have the OpenShift core images for installation and running the cluster inside. And for that, we have the mirror registry, which is really a simplified installer running on a RHEL 8 node, deploying Quay in Podman containers, Podman pods actually, for you. So that has a simple requirement, 2 vCPUs and 6 gigs of memory. It is really stripped down for the same reasons. So you don't get any of the additional features like geo-replication or mirroring or scanning, but you don't need those for a registry that's just supposed to hold OpenShift related product content. You use the OC utility in order to mirror this content in. You don't use Quay mirroring to do that. We have the OC mirroring tool that does that, that understands what an OpenShift release is, what an operator catalog is. So I would really propose to use that. Then you get away with a smaller resource footprint for an edge registry that only holds OpenShift product content, if that is your use case.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So that's a very extensive answer. I mean, having also gone through that, there's a lot of very point on topics that you have addressed. I'm not sure if Stefan is very familiar with that, but yeah, basically the HPA, the horizontal pod autoscaler, is responsible for reserving those amounts of resources, and you can lower it. But basically, I would say the Quay operator is intended for production use. So if the end goal is really to try Quay and in, I would say, non-production and very minimal footprint without using the scan or such things, there's a section in the documentation where we can deploy Quay for POC. And you can actually just run Quay in a container and just having Podman run the Quay registry itself, and you can play with it. So this is going to take even much lower resources if you wanted to try that, Stefan. So yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities. But again, the operator has some advanced capabilities, and it's aimed at, I would say, providing a production grade registry, and that's why there's this notion of resources, requests, and such things. All right, so thanks, very interesting question, and thanks, Daniel, for the detailed answer. All right, so let's maybe go and have a look at OpenShift using a Quay external registry, and then maybe you can explain what happens in the background. Does that work for you, Daniel?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead.
Okay, cool. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so what I have here is an OpenShift cluster that has actually a Quay instance running on it. So there's, as you can see here, a route that will take us to the Quay that is hosted within this platform. It has been installed with the Quay operator. And as we can see here, we have already some repositories that have been created in the registry. And there are some organizations and users that have been already set up with the platform. So let's quickly have a look at those. And for the moment, I don't see anything that says level up organization, for instance. So what I'm going to do is, as a developer, I'm going to go to the developer perspective. I'm going to create a new project. Okay, and we're going to call it level up. So for the moment, I don't have anything running on this platform, on this project or namespace. And what I'm going to do here is just go as I would do with a traditional OpenShift deployment. And I'm going to choose to deploy a Node.js application. So this Node.js app has a lot of options. So I'm going to choose to use a builder image. And what this image does is it's going to use what we call the source to image process that will turn my Git code into a container image that is going to be pushed to the default registry that comes with OpenShift is if we are doing things by default. So yeah, let's just give it a name here. So for level up node, for instance, and again, level up node. So it's going to create the deployment, etc. Okay, go ahead and create. And what should happen now is OpenShift has automatically created a build configuration to clone the code and actually do the build of the Docker or of the container image and building the code and creating an output image that would be pushed to the registry. So if we look at the build that has been kicked off, we can see in the details here that instead of pointing to the default OpenShift registry, which should be something like a registry, internal registry dash 5,000 for the local port, etc. We see that it's already pointing to the Quay external registry or to the public URL that we see here, meaning that OpenShift has already automatically configured the build process to push the resulting image to the outside. So for example, if you see here, this pull spec references the internal image or the internal registry that we use. So this is going to use a builder image that comes from the platform itself, but the output would be pushed to an outside registry. Now let's go back to the Quay registries. Let's hit refresh here and see if anything has come up. So we see here that a new repository has been created for us called the Level Up node. And the Level Up node is basically the name of the application that we have just created. So we can see here that it also created an organization and it created some users for us to be able to build the images, to deploy them, and to pull them from this registry back into OpenShift. So yeah, while everything goes, is built and pushed. Okay, so it seems everything is complete. Let's have a look at the repository that has been created. We can see that it has pushed a latest tag image a minute ago, and it has also run some security scans for it. So, that's pretty impressive because I didn't have to set up anything for this to work, although this is not using the internal registry. This is using the external Quay that happens to run on the cluster itself, but it could run anywhere. It could be Quay IO, it could be a central Quay elsewhere. Daniel, can you please tell us what's the magic behind this? How does this all happen?
Sure. I guess you can already guess that since I'm, as a product manager looking after Quay and also parts of the operator framework, it has to do with operators, right? So there's actually an operator installed on the cluster that you were starting to build on, and it's called the Quay bridge operator. And it's called like
Let's
that.
have a look at it.
Yeah, let's take a look. So you have a bunch of operators installed. That's great.
That's a Quay bridge operator. Okay.
That's the one. So this is pretty much the magic, right? So its job is to essentially replicate the same user experience you previously had with the internal registry, which means you can store your images whenever needed. You can retrieve them whenever they need it. You never need to worry about getting credentials first, setting that up in your cluster, pre-creating a landing zone in the registry, so to say. All of it just happens in the background, right? So this operator basically talks to Quay. You configure it with a custom resource that's called Quay integration. So if you want to click that, you have one there. So this is how you configure this operator. And what you tell the operator here is basically where is your Quay registry that you want to integrate with, right? Where is the URL? What are the credentials? And you configure also your cluster ID here. This will be used as a prefix for anything that is created as part of automation in that registry. This is pretty important because if you think about this, what it's going to do is going to use your project names and image stream names as naming label things in the registry. So if you put a project called test in here, it will create a test
prefix
and with the test prefix in Quay. So you can imagine with a central registry that would easily lead to collisions, right? Because others have maybe created the test project in their cluster. So you can also give the operator like a unique prefix per cluster here to avoid any collisions. And you can totally have dozens of clusters running the bridge operator with just one Quay instance. So the fact that this Quay registry runs on your cluster is totally transparent. It could run anywhere, right? But here you basically tell the operator where to find the registry, how to authenticate to it, and what prefix to use to create stuff there. So
and it handles all the namespaces. They are automatically synced and Because
Exactly.
I believe there's a change that happened compared to the previous release where you had to manually maybe mention the whitelist namespaces where you say
Yeah, that's another
this is
configuration option.
yeah.
So by default, this operator will watch for a couple of things to happen in the cluster. So for instance, whenever you create a project in OpenShift, it will create that
Mhm.
organization. So when you
Okay.
created that project called Level Up earlier, it actually already created the organization
The
called OpenShift.
organization. So yeah, so if we look at it, yeah, we see the prefix here
Yeah,
and we see the organization indeed in here
exactly.
as
Right.
well.
So that would happen from now on every time you create a project in OpenShift.
Okay.
So you may not want that, right? Because you may only be interested in for that to happen with a bunch of developer or production projects. So you
Okay.
can tell the operator that there's an allow list or
Oh,
there's
okay.
also a deny list
So
to not make it so global. But by default, any project you create from now on will also have a counterpart in Quay in the form of an organization. So an
okay.
organization is
So
really like our top level component to bring users and content together.
so another question. Uh, is it possible to have multiple Quay integrations running on the same cluster, directing or targeting different registries or targeting for, so for instance, I have 10 namespaces that I want to push to this specific Quay or instance, or maybe I want to prefix them with something different. Is it something that we can also do? Like, can we collocate different Quay integrations and point them to different uh, prefixes or different, even different Quay registries? Does it make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. To be honest with you, that's an extremely interesting question I haven't gotten so far. So most of our users basically use one central registry,
Okay.
and like have the cluster prefix actually determined by the operator itself. So it will use the OpenShift cluster ID for that.
Oh, okay.
But I guess in theory, yes, that would be how it works. I'm not sure though. I have never tried it,
Okay.
and it's not the way we test it. But since the operator really just reacts to these events and sets up watches, I think that could be an option. We might need to try that first, but
Okay.
yeah, what most users really are doing is like setting it up to one central registry and then let the prefix magic do its work.
All right. Okay. So thanks. Um, so basically, this is the I would say the magic. Can you tell us a bit more what happens in the background? So, say for instance, I have so traditionally when we are using the default OpenShift registry, it's going to create some things that are specific to OpenShift, like image streams and image stream tags. So these
Mhm.
are basically pointers to the images. So with OpenShift, we don't directly use the Docker pull spec or the container, the image pull spec hardened. It's basically we reference those what we call image streams, which are dynamic pointers that in turn are resolved to the image pull spec. So what happens when we do that? Because I haven't had to change anything, even when I created the app. It
Mhm.
just went with the default OpenShift behavior, but
Yeah.
still it points out to the Quay registry.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
how does that magic happen?
So that's intentional, right? It's supposed to be under the covers like this, so you don't need to like change any of the workflows you have. So what the
Okay.
operator does is watch the cluster for events. So I already said it watches for projects that get created in order to get
Okay.
organizations created in Quay with the prefix in the same name as the project. What also happens is that whenever you create an image stream, a repository in that organization in Quay will be created. So remember, like the project name in OpenShift maps to the organization name. An
Okay.
image stream in that OpenShift project will create a repository in Quay. So if you go back to Quay, you see that within OpenShift Level Up, it has created this repository called Level Up Node, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
like a repository is really a place where you store images, and here you can see all the tags that
Okay.
are
So
created. So
Yeah,
when you
sorry,
Mhm.
I have maybe another one that might be easier to see because it has more multiple image streams. But yeah, that one, for instance. So yeah, I have an organization for a namespace called Cloud Native Apps, where basically there are many repositories, one for each of the components that have been created.
Mhm. Right. So one image stream equals then one repository in that project, can be an arbitrary number. And then
Okay,
whenever you build with a build config an image that is connected to this image stream, the operator actually intercepts that, changes the output to point to Quay, and pushes the
okay,
resulting build image as part of the build to Quay instead of the internal registry. So if
okay,
you were to actually repeat the build on the Node.js app that you had before, we can just do
okay.
that. It would actually create a new image. I think you
Yeah,
just go to actions and then what I got the build config, run that one again. And
okay,
when that's happening, it's actually going to push another image. Now it's going to push the image with the same tag. It's going to be latest. But I'm going to show you a unique feature of Quay that you can use to actually see that these were previously two images. So if you go back to
okay,
your level up repository, yeah, you need to use your browser back button. So the endpoint is different for repositories.
yeah. So
If you go
we're
back,
going back to the level up here.
yeah,
Okay.
and then
Uh,
go to the
so
tags. So
so
we'll wait
for
for
the
this to
moment,
refresh. Yeah.
yeah. So
So
let's watch the log until it finishes.
yeah. So maybe I
And
can also share one thing that also happened, right? So in order to talk to a registry, you normally need credentials. Things
okay,
aren't public, especially in enterprise, right? So you need a username and
yeah,
password to kind of put stuff into a registry and also to retrieve it from the registry again. The
correct.
operator has also automated that. So when it created the organization,
Mm-hmm.
as a result of you creating a project in OpenShift, it created what's called a robot token in Quay. The robot
Okay,
token in Quay is really the same as a service account in OpenShift. It's sort of like an identity that can be used to share a password without sharing your username and password that you use to authenticate against Quay. And you can have this have different credentials. So you see here, it has now pushed a newer tag. And if you
sure.
go in the left-hand navigation pane to that little clock icon,
Mm-hmm.
you can see that it actually moved the tag, right? Because
Yeah,
now the tag was pointing to something newer, which is that newer SHA. You also
cool.
see that there's the ability to revert that. So Quay has a time machine feature that allows you to revert those tag overrides in case you accidentally overwrote your production image. So Quay
Okay,
keeps track of these things and allows you to roll this back within a user-defined time frame.
very nice. Cool. So yeah, I can see also some usage logs, like if this has been pulled, how many pulls per day, etc.
Mhm.
So that's also stuff that doesn't happen with the default registry.
Exactly. And these are governance features that you definitely need as an admin of such a central registry to have an audit trail of who pulled what image when, right? So these are things that get harder to do across multiple registries when you use an internal registry. And
Yeah.
Quay being an enterprise registry does that just out of the box, right? But it also nicely integrates, as we have seen, with that flow that you usually have with S2I and build configs, and
Okay.
really put stuff in there. So yeah, so this is happening all the time when you do a build now that is associated to such an image stream. And as you have seen, it already rolled out that new image. So if you go to your
Yeah.
project, you should see that that deployment has actually been revved and is now updated.
Yeah. Let's have a look at the deployments.
Right. So in events, you will probably see that it has been updated.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so see it scaled up to a new replica with the new image. So that
Yeah.
is also a reaction as part of the operator, right? So once the build finished and the push is complete, the operator will actually trigger that deployment to run that new image again, because you also want to run the new code that you just built off your Git repository. So all that works seamlessly in the background on your behalf, managing
Mhm.
things, user accounts, credentials, tags, and images in the background. So you can focus on what's important, which is getting your code in production.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Daniel, for going into those detailed features. So yeah, basically everything has happened automatically thanks to the Quay bridge operator intercepting those OpenShift events and transforming them into talking to the Quay API and creating things like the organizations, the users, the secrets to be able to pull and push the images per namespace, etc. Um, so what this means is that if I wanted to use an external registry, which is not like Quay, these are things that I should do manually. Is that correct? I mean, that's exactly the same as with any Kubernetes cluster when you want to configure an integration from Kubernetes to an external registry. These are things that you need to set up,
Mhm.
like the namespace. Now I created a new namespace. I would have to create the corresponding uh, repo or organization if that notion exists in the registry. And I will have to create all those secrets. I will have to create the service accounts or what we call the robots manually. So so this is also possible with it's possible to use an external registry other than Quay, except that we would not benefit from this automation, and we will have to create all of those things manually as we would do with uh, with an OpenShift with a Kubernetes traditional cluster.
Yeah. There's one
Um,
more thing that you can actually see
yeah.
when you go back to your cluster.
Okay.
Um, if you go back to your project um, where you created that Node.js example,
Okay. From the admin perspective or from the developer
from the
perspective?
admin perspective, yeah. So
Okay.
it doesn't show anything now, but in probably 10 minutes or so, it will actually start to show image vulnerabilities here, because you're
Okay.
running an image that has vulnerabilities in Quay. So if you go switch back to the Quay view, you will have seen that Quay told you that there are like 6 high vulnerabilities in there, and
Okay.
the total numbers is probably higher, right? It's 51 medium as well. So these are all the CVEs that Quay has found inside that image. So these are packages that have known vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And Quay will
Okay.
tell you what those are, and it will also tell you which component has that vulnerability. So we see here there's obviously a Python library called URL libfree that has a vulnerability, or there's a vulnerable Vim minimal executable in that container image. So this is
Okay.
information that you want to have as a admin or as a developer of these images to kind of reduce your attack surface. Quay
Hmm.
also tells you in which newer version of that package this has actually been fixed. So
Okay.
this propagation of vulnerabilities is asynchronous, so it will take a little while per image, but you can see
Yeah.
here
So
others.
maybe we can look at some other ones like the
Mhm.
this one has been pulled some time ago, and now I'm in the OpenShift UI, and I can still see the this information rounded up here
Mhm.
within the OpenShift cluster. So
Right.
yeah,
It will also tell you which pods are affected by this. So this is an image that's vulnerable, but the running pod is what counts, right? So there's apparently like a single pod here that runs this,
hmm
um, and could be more than one, right? But
yeah.
what this does is essentially looking at all the pods running in your cluster and figuring out if they come from images that are served by a Quay registry. Could be
Okay.
Quay.io, could be your Quay here on the cluster, an external Quay somewhere else. And when that's the case, it will interrogate that Quay instance for any vulnerabilities that these image might have been revealing as part of the scanning. So this is
Okay.
not scanning in the cluster. It's basically just asking Quay for the scan results. And soon
Okay.
your Nginx will pop up here like the one from Siamek there. So that kind of projects all the vulnerability information right inside your console so that you can see what is the vulnerable stuff that you're running, and what is where is it running, and
Okay.
who does it belong to, right? So as an admin, that would be pretty handy. Again, this is live scanning in the cluster already. Everything has been
Yeah.
scanned in Quay,
So
but yeah,
so it's pulling the data from Quay and it's displaying it here in the OpenShift console. And if
Mhm.
I wanted to have more details, I could still use the manifest link here, and it takes me directly to Quay
yeah.
to get
Or if you scroll down, there's actually a bunch of
the
details already in
details.
this view. So you'll
Okay.
see also which packages have been identified, which
Hmm.
CVE or Red Hat Security Advisory is actually associated to that, in which newer version of the package it's fixed. So this seems to come from a fairly old RHEL 7 base image. That's why it has so many vulnerabilities, and
Yeah.
that really shows you the value of rebuilding your images very regularly off newer base images. And
Cool.
UBI is really really nice to use for that, because it gets updated extremely often by Red Hat, and you just need to rebuild your image off a newer UBI version. We don't backward stuff in UBI; it always rolls forward. But we have
Okay.
floating tags like UBI 8 that always point to the latest UBI 8 version that's out there. If you rebuild on top of that, um, you will essentially always be able to eradicate a lot of CVEs that are just part of the base image, that aren't even part of your organization, right? So having that view is super useful. It's just static image analysis, so it doesn't do a whole lot of contextual analysis like our ACS product does. But you
Okay.
kind of get it with Quay as part of another operator that's called the Quay security operator, which is also installed on this cluster, which makes all this UI integration happen.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Daniel. So yeah, so that's a very good example of seeing how we can use a more advanced, I would say, not necessarily production ready, because it's not the right term, because the internal image is also used in production use cases in many situations. But again, it does bring a lot more features, this notion of HA, the security scanning capabilities, the geolocation. So yeah, and the fact that the OpenShift experience remains untouched uh, is, I think, a really awesome experience, because as an OpenShift user, even if I switch to Quay, it's gonna be transparent to me. I don't have to like recreate or rewire image stream tags to point out to the outside registry. So yeah, thanks for these insights on how these things work. Um, all right, so the topic of today being custom registry options. So Quay is, I would say, the Red Hat choice when you want to upgrade your registry experience, and especially if you're going multi-cluster, etc. And again, of course, as we mentioned, there's the possibility to use uh, any external registry uh, to store the images and pull the images from those, except that everything that we have shown here should be done in a manual process, or maybe you have to write out some scripts to do that. So, for instance, creating the pull secrets, push and pull secrets, creating the repositories in the registry, synchronizing the users between the registry and the platform service accounts, for instance, the service accounts that are responsible for pushing or um, pulling the images. So basically, if you want to look at it, um, let's go to user management, for instance, and switch to our level up prod namespace. And we see here in the service accounts that we have a builder service account. This is the one that is used by default by OpenShift whenever we kick off a build process. Uh, So here, for instance, we see, we see that the builder has actually some secrets that has been automatically associated to it to be able to push to the external registry. And that's basically what the Quay operator, one of the things that the Quay operator has done. If I wanted to use an external registry, I could very well do that. I could change my image stream to say output goes to my external registry. But in order to push to that registry, I would need to add an image pool secret, or well, pull or push actually, and say that this is the secret that needs to be used to interact with that external registry. And I believe I have something like that in the My App project. And I have a build config. So maybe, yeah, it's gonna be in the build instead. So this is a build config that I have manually changed before installing the Quay operator. So basically, I created the app in OpenShift, but I had to manually change the output Docker reference to point out to this my app Node.js repository that I have created manually also on the external registry. So basically, if you are using the external registry, which is not Quay and not with the bridge, these are the things that you have to do. You have to change basically those output settings to say this is the tag or the pull spec that you need to push to, and these are the secrets that you need to use to be able to authenticate to that external registry. All right, so we've got, I think, everything covered. We now we have seen what we can do out of the box in an automated way with the Quay operator, but we also have, I would say, dissected the different steps needed if you wanted to do that with a generic external registry. So thanks a lot, Daniel. Are there any things we missed or any things we wanted to mention?
Thanks, Jafar. No, I think this was a pretty comprehensive overview. So going from the internal registry to an external one, explaining why that is a good idea, but what is the management overhead that comes with that, and how you can lower that with something like an operator, and also get some of the unique registry features right into the cluster with another operator.
All right. Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to show something from an admin perspective on how you need to manage the cluster configuration to point out to different registries. So we have something where a custom resource or custom resource definition we have created for OpenShift that you need to use in order to administrate the registries. And basically, if you wanted to add an external registry, you would have to, for instance, if it's an insecure registry, for my example, it's a non-production where I use a self-site certificate. So in order for it to work, I have to add that registry in the insecure registries list. And the way we do it is that you edit the image named cluster, and then you add whatever registries you want in there. If you also wanted to be able to browse the content of the registry directly from the OpenShift UI, you would have to add the allowed registries in this section. So that way you are able to see the content of the registry directly from the OpenShift console.
Right, and to add to that, this is so the insecure part is really needed if you have a self-signed TLS certificate in place.
Correct.
So what I find most customers are doing is like they trust the CA that OpenShift uses to generate those certificates.
Mm-hmm.
The OpenShift CA is generally trusted. If that's in place and you run Quay on top of OpenShift, it will automatically create a route endpoint by the operator, and that will have a certificate that's signed by that trusted CA. So it's usually not required to put it into the insecure space. It's going to be automatically trusted by the cluster. And then you have a mutually trusted and signed communication going on between the cluster and your registry endpoint.
Cool. So yeah, maybe we can talk about that for another topic, but there's a cert manager operator that we can use to delegate the certificate management for some of these components. So we do that natively for the OpenShift components and for all the ingresses and routes that we create using the trusted CA with the OpenShift cluster. But yeah, if we wanted to delegate that, for example, to Let's Encrypt or whatever, we could also go the cert manager path and use that operator to do these kind of things. All right. So thank you very much, Daniel. That was a very nice session to better understand the capabilities that we can provide with, we call it the custom registry, but it's a way to actually say not using the default registry that comes with OpenShift. So yeah, thanks a lot and great job on what you guys did with the Quay operator and the bridge, because it makes it very transparent in terms of usage and still brings all the Quay capabilities to OpenShift seamlessly. All right, thanks a lot. I think we are just a little bit over time, but we started also a little bit later. So any final words, Daniel?
Thanks for having me, Jafar. This has been fun. Yeah, I think there's also a stream 2 weeks ago in the Ask an Admin series of the Red Hat TV channel. So please check that out. I'm talking there with Andrew and some other folks about Quay and the mirror registry and what sets Quay apart from other registries and why it's a good idea to use that as a central piece of your multi-cluster strategy.
All right. So thank you very much, Daniel. Thanks everyone who has been attending this episode. Again, please like, subscribe, and share if you like the content. If not, let us know why, and we can work on improving it so you like it. And so, yeah, thanks again, and hoping to see you soon for the next episode. Thanks a lot, and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.